In a world drowned in noise, most truths lie buried in silence. But not tonight. Tonight, we peel back the velvet curtain and discover what was never meant to be found. Welcome to the shadows. Welcome to Let's Discover.
Let's discover.
In the shadows of Victorian London, a name was whispered, not with reverence, but with fear. Jack, the Ripper, a faceless terror who painted the cobbled streets red. Tonight, we step into the fog to meet a ghost who never left. In 1888, London's East End was a place of despair, overcrowded, under-policed, and drowning in poverty. Whitechapel was a breeding ground for crime, but no one expected a killer who would become legend. Whitechapel wasn't just poor, it was forsaken. Narrow alleys swallowed light, every corner whispered secrets, and in those shadows, something monstrous waited. A woman's body was found on Bucks Row, in the pale morning light, on August 1888, which was the first victim, Mary Ann Nichols. Her throat slashed and abdomen mutilated. The work was brutal, surgical and calculated. This was not ordinary crime. Her death was a message. This was not theft. This was ritual. Between August and November, 4 more women were slain. Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, all prostitutes, all murdered with disturbing precision. Annie Chapman killed on September 8th in Hanbury Street. Her death was colder and more precise. Her uterus removed. The Ripper was not just killing, he was leaving messages. Elizabeth Stride, September 30th, Dutfield's Yard, a clean cut and no mutilation. Some say he was interrupted. Catherine Eddowes, same night. Meter Square, 2 cities, 1 night. Her face carved and her kidney missing. Mary Jane Kelly, the final act. November 9th. Mary Jane Kelly was found inside her room. Her body was unrecognizable. Unlike the others, she wasn't killed on the street. Her body was so brutally mutilated, the coroner could barely identify her. It was the killer's crescendo. Mary Kelly's death was not fast. It was not silent. It was rage, unleashed. The killer left his soul on that wall. The Ripper's rage unrestrained. The police called them the Canonical Five, 5 lives, 5 names lost in fog. But each a person, a daughter, a sister. But their killer left more than bodies. He left questions. If the dark draws your curiosity closer, tap the lantern below and subscribe. And if you find value in what we uncover, leave a mark, a like. Whitechapel, Spitalfields, Berner Street, Meter Square, names burned into maps and nightmares, each location a theater of horror, each address the echo of a scream long gone. The killer began writing, and hundreds of letters flooded in, claiming to be from Jack the Ripper. But one stood out, the Dear Boss letter. It named the Ripper, and it promised more blood. He called himself Jack, promised carnage signed in blood. Was it the real killer, or just a hoaxer drawn to fame? The investigators searched the fog with flashlights and fear. Men of rank, off duty, but not always of vision. Inspector Frederick Aberline, the man in the middle, Scotland Yard's finest methodical, was tireless and haunted. Superintendent Thomas Arnold, head of division, was the man who weighed down by political pressure. Inspector Edmund Reed, brilliant, intense officer, was driven by something personal. Sir Charles Warren, commissioner, more soldier than sleuth, resigned in disgrace before the case was closed. The Ripper wore no face, so they gave him many, each more elusive than the last. Let me show you the men who haunted the police files, and perhaps still haunt the fog. The name of the first suspect was Montague John Druitt, a school teacher and a barrister. He was dismissed from his job in November 1888, but in December 1888, His body was pulled from the Thames near Chiswick, just a month after his dismissal. Did he suicide? Perhaps, but the timing, just weeks after Mary Kelly's murder, was too precise for coincidence. So, why he was a suspect? Because he was a barrister and part-time school teacher, dismissed from his teaching job in November 1888, died by suicide shortly after Mary Jane Kelly's murder in December 1888, mentioned by Assistant Chief Constable Sir Melville Macnaghten as a strong suspect. Final summary: the suspect who never stood trial, because he vanished beneath the river. Scotland Yard whispered his name posthumously. Aaron Kosminski was the second suspect, a Polish Jewish barber by profession. Was he arrested? Yes, he was arrested. Not for murder, but for madness. In March 1891 he was committed to Colney Hatch Asylum. Why he was a suspect? Because lived near the murder scenes in Whitechapel, suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, had a deep hatred of women. Later identified by a witness in a police lineup. But fear made the truth dissolve. Strongly believed to be the Ripper by Sir Robert Anderson and Inspector Donald Swanson. Final summary: silent until the end. The man who knew how to disappear without leaving. The third suspect was George Chapman, real name Severin Kłosowski, arrested in 1902. Not for stabbing, but for poison. He was a suspect because convicted of poisoning 3 of his wives, worked as a barber and surgeon, familiar with anatomy, lived in Whitechapel during the time of the murders. Inspector Aberline believed he was the best candidate. Final summary: the hand fits the blade and the bottle. He killed women silently with poison. But did he once kill them with a blade? The name of the fourth suspect was Dr. Francis Tumblety. He was a wealthy American. In November 1888, he was arrested in London for gross indecency, and the same week Mary Kelly died. His home was full of jars with human organs. He despised women, called them vile. Then, he vanished back to America. No trial, just whispers and fear. Final summary: he carried the right tools and the wrong thoughts. Michael Ostrog, a Russian surgeon, was the fifth suspect, arrested many times for theft, fraud, and lies. Macnaghten named him in his top 3, but when the blood ran in Whitechapel, Ostrog may have been behind bars in France. Still, Scotland Yard kept him on the board. The last suspect in the list was James Maybrick, a Liverpool gentleman who was never arrested and never even questioned. Maybrick died of arsenic poisoning in 1889, killed by his wife. But over a century later, a diary emerged, filled with confessions, initials, and blood. He claimed to be Jack. The diary told the tale, but was it his, or just a whisper through time? Was it real, or just a writer's ghost story? The answer lies between ink and illusion. Dozens of suspects emerged, but none convicted. The Ripper slipped through the fingers of Scotland Yard into myth. They were doctors. They were paupers. Each had motive, but none had proof. And the Ripper vanished like smoke. Poor policing, no forensic science, and class prejudice. The Ripper thrived in confusion and fear. And in 1888, that was enough to vanish without a trace. No DNA, no cameras, just guesses and shadows. The Ripper did not outsmart them, he hid in their blind spots. To this day, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains unsolved. He became more than a man, a myth, a fear passed through generations. His story echoes in every dark alley. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he watched the headlines with a smirk, but one truth remains. Jack the Ripper never left London. We chase monsters in the dark. But what if the darkest monster wears our own face? Until next time, keep your lantern lit, because the fog always returns. Perhaps the story ends here, or perhaps it only slips deeper into the fog. In a world built on silence, you were willing to listen. Thank you for that. Before the fog closes in, remember, Some truths only echoes when someone is willing to listen. Light the way. Like and subscribe.